Hello everyone, welcome to the Read Aloud for Assignment 3 in U.S. History, where our aim is to answer the question here, what were the main issues that people faced during industrialization, also known as the Gilded Age? So I'm going to review the notes with you about the Industrial Revolution first, and then I'll go on to read aloud the written documents that you're responding to. Okay, so quick review starting from here. The Industrial Revolution from 1860 to 1920 was a time when the U.S. switched from making products by hand to making them with machines in factories. And the four main causes of the Industrial Revolution that we reviewed back when we were actually in school together are that Americans discovered large supplies of natural resources in the West, and that made it easy for us to take those over to factories and make them into goods. We also had open-door immigration policies, which meant that immigrants could come in as they pleased. There were no rules stopping them, and all those immigrants meant more people to work in the factories. We also had that laissez-faire government policy. Remember, laissez-faire means lazy government. In other words, the government was not going to interfere with businesses or tell businesses how to run their companies. Businesses could do whatever they wanted to make money. And there were a bunch of major technological inventions and innovations, like the Bessemer steel process that made it really easy and cheap to produce steel. The assembly line production made by Henry Ford. We did an activity with this where it was, as shown in the GIF over here, a faster way to make products at a cheaper price. And we had the spread of electricity. Now, some problems during the Industrial Revolution that we already talked about one was the development of monopolies or trusts. So remember, we had that laissez-faire government. The government's not telling businesses what to do. And this led to the development of monopolies or trust, when one company owns every part of the production process, right? So basically, when one company is the only type of that company that can run. So for example, if Nike was the only company that could make shoes, right? The owners of those companies, or monopolists, made tons of money and used their money or their wealth to bribe and control Congress, okay, to pass laws that supported businesses, not workers. We also looked at how all this immigration led to increased population in cities, which led to people living in tenement housing, which were tiny apartments where families would cramp together, okay? There was no plumbing, there was no trash disposal, it was very unsanitary. It was dirty, unsafe, dangerous, crowded, just disgusting. Okay? And we looked at how the laissez-faire government policy meant that in factories and places where people worked, there weren't a lot of safety laws. So conditions were very unsafe. There was no protective equipment being used. Oftentimes people would even work barefoot. There were very low wages. Factory owners paid their workers low wages because they were unskilled, and that way those monopolists could make even more money. And a lot of factories used child labor, or children, to work in factories or mines, which is obviously dangerous. So in response to this, we looked at how the muckrakers tried to expose these problems to the public. Muckrakers, remember, are journalists who, during the Gilded Age, would publish stories and photos about how awful living and working conditions were during industrialization. Three examples of muckrakers are: one, Jacob Riis. He published the book How the Other Half Lives to show how awful tenement housing in New York City was. Louis Hine, whose photo is right over here. He was a photographer who took photos to expose how bad child labor was in factories to convince people to try to stop child labor. And one we didn't learn about yet, but who is important, is Upton Sinclair, who wrote the book The Jungle in 1903, talking about how disgusting the meat packing industry was. That they were just shipping out rotten meat that had maggots in it, that people would lose a finger in the factories, it would fall into the meat, and they would just pack it up and ship it out anyways. It was honestly disgusting. So, with that little review, I want you to go down. On the next page is a vocab guide if you need it while you're working, okay, with relevant vocab words. But what you are going to do is respond, starting from the instructions up here, you're going to respond to the 4 DBQs about problems during industrialization. And remember, you're being graded on your annotations and your answers. So for your annotations, I want you to write in the right-hand column over here 1 to 2 notes with either outside information, so things maybe you remember learning about industrialization or things from your notes on the pages above, or a summary of what you read, okay? Outside information or a summary. And then your answer should be accurate and in full sentences, okay? And it should be in your own words, not copied from the document. So I'll read through, there's 2 written documents, I'll read through both of them. Document 1 I did as a model, but you do have to answer a second question about it, so I'm still going to read through it. My model annotations are over here in blue, okay? And my model answer is down here in blue also. So let's read through document 1 together. Okay. Starting here. So many people in so little space. 800 per acre in some city blocks. Flies were fat and brazen, or loud, and everywhere, because in summer the windows and doors had to be open all the time in hopes that a breeze might find its way down the river and through the crowded streets, among the close-packed tenements, and across the back of one's neck. Along with the flies came the noise of steel wagon wheels on paving stones, the wails or cries of babies, peddlers or beggars bellowing, the roaring of elevated trains or subways, hollering children, and the scritch, scratch, and tinkle of wind-up phonographs or music players. So as I'm reading this, right, I noticed that they talked about tenements over here, and so some outside info I added was the definition of what tenements were. So on the side for one of my annotations, I wrote tenements were cramped apartments that many immigrants in cities lived in. There's some outside information you can add from your notes or your prior knowledge for annotation points. Let's keep reading. Starting here. Late summer was a season of dust and grime, or filth. Half the metropolis, or city, it seemed, was under construction. A new tower of 10 or more stories topping out every 5 days. Competing skyscrapers, or tall buildings, racing toward the clouds. A third and then a fourth bridge stretching across the East River, where a generation earlier there had been none. The hot, damp air was full of dirt, cement, powder, sawdust, and exhaust from the steam shovels or construction machines. So as an example of a summary annotation over here on the right side, I wrote the summary of that second part. You know, my understanding of what I read is that construction of buildings caused the air to be incredibly dirty. Okay, so there's our first document. And the question we are answering down here in yellow is, according to David von Drehel, what were 2 conditions faced by people living in urban areas in the early 1900s? Now my model answer in blue here that I wrote is one condition people in urban areas faced was that construction caused the air to be dirty and polluted, right? I got that from my summary annotation up here. Now, your next step would be to answer a second condition people faced. So I've given you a sentence starter here. Another condition people in urban areas faced was, and since I already did the annotating for the model, you just got to tell me one more condition people faced from document 1. So there's document 1. Document 2, you have to do the same thing, but again, this is a photograph, so on the side you can put things that you notice from the photograph or things that you can connect to your outside learning, okay? And the question for document 2 is, what was one reason that Lewis Hine published the photo above? So use the photo to help you answer that question. For document 3, it is another photo. Again, put what you notice or what you can connect to outside information on the side for annotations, and you answer the question, based on this photograph, what was one condition faced by families living in tenements? Okay? And then document 4 is another written document, so I'll read through this one. Make sure you put your annotations with outside information or a summary on the side. Okay. So the question you are answering down here at the bottom in yellow is, according to Miriam Finn Scott, what were 2 conditions that made factory work difficult in 1911? So let's read. Starting from the top. On Friday evening, March 24th, 2 young sisters walked on the stairways from the 9th floor where they were employed and joined the horde or crowd of workers that nightly surges, or heads in large groups, homeward into New York's East Side. Since 8 o'clock, they had been bending over shirt waists, or shirts, of silk and lace, tensely guiding the valuable fabrics through their swift machines, with hundreds of power-driven machines whirring or running madly about them. And now the two were very weary or tired, and were filled with that despondency or hopelessness which comes after a day of exhausting routine, when the next day and the next week and the next year hold promise of nothing better than just this same monotonous or repetitive strain. "It's worse than it was before the strike, a year ago," bitterly said Gussie, the older sister. "The boss squeezes or puts pressure on us at every point and drives us to the limit. He carries us up in elevators of mornings or every morning, so we won't lose a second in getting started. But at night, when we're tired and the boss has got all out of us he wants for the day, he makes us walk down. At 8 o'clock, he shuts the doors, so that if you come even a minute late, you can't get in till noon, and so lose half a day. He does that to make sure every person gets there on time or ahead of time. He fines us for every little thing. He always holds back a week's wages to be sure that he can be able to collect for damages he says we do, and to keep us from leaving. And every evening he searches our pocketbooks and bags to see that we don't carry any goods or trimmings, cloth, away. Oh, you would think you are in Russia again." So based on that document, give me 1 to 2 annotations over here and answer the question at the bottom. You can always email me or leave me a comment if you have any questions. All right, good luck.